Americans for Fair Taxation presents the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, president of Americans for Fair Taxation, and recorded by Bob Paxton, a volunteer with the Florida FAIRtax Educational Association. And now, this week's Chairman's Report.
Hello, I'm Bob Paxton with the AFFT Chairman's Report for Friday, June 13th, 2025. This week's Chairman's Report is guest written by Jade Walle, a practicing CPA who has been on the Americans for Fair Taxation Board of Directors. The FAIRtax, checking all the Democrat boxes. H.R. 25, the FAIRtax Act, has received both Democrat and Republican sponsorship since it was first introduced in Congress back in 1999. However, over these past 26 years, sponsorship of the bill has been primarily Republican. Now, when we examine the FAIRtax, this should surprise anyone who studies politics and knows what each party purports to believe in and support. So let's take a look. First, Democrats have laid claim to the belief that taxes should be progressive, not regressive, since those who make less are generally considered less able to pay the taxes. Now, the FAIRtax is significantly more progressive than the current income payroll tax system. Let's take a simple lower income example where a family of four earns and spends $58,000 a year with no savings and no purchases of any used items. After their $9,729 prebate, they'll pay a net of $3,611 in FAIRtax. That's a 6.2% rate, and that's less than they would pay in payroll tax alone under the current system. The current payroll tax rate is 7.65%, and it applies to every dollar earned. In addition, part of this family's income would be taxed at 12%, with the remainder falling into the 22% tax bracket. Clearly, this low-income family would be much better off under the FAIRtax. Check. The FAIRtax untaxes basic necessities through the prebate and removes the single most regressive element of our current tax system, that being the payroll tax. This allows workers to keep their entire paycheck free of any federal income tax, all while causing real wages to rise. Democrats claim that they are the working person's party and the champion for those who struggle to realize the American dream. The FAIRtax removes the hidden taxes the working poor pay. Payroll and income taxes imposed on businesses are just like any other cost of doing business. They get passed along to consumers in the prices of their products and services. In addition, under the FAIRtax, employers won't need to match the 7.65% payroll tax for each employee. This significantly reduces the cost of doing business all through the supply chain. Studies indicate that depending on the industry, the cost of retail goods will drop from 10 to 25% with the FAIRtax. For politicians who decry that tariffs and taxes just increase the prices of the goods we purchase, they are correct. Check. The exporting of U.S. manufacturing jobs has meaningfully affected our blue-collar communities. Think Detroit, Cleveland, and Allentown. The Democrat platform has consistently courted these communities for decades. Now, the current tax system is a disaster for American companies producing goods for export, and it's the primary reason that so many American manufacturing jobs have gone overseas. Now, most of our foreign competitors operate in countries where they have a value-added tax. Now, when those competitors produce a product for export, their government refunds to them all the value-added tax that's accumulated along the production chain. The result is that those companies can offer their goods on the world market at significantly lower prices than U.S.-based manufacturers. That's because the prices of U.S.-produced goods still contain all the embedded costs of our income payroll tax system. By removing those embedded costs, the FAIRtax puts American manufacturers back on a level playing field with their foreign competitors. Helping our working poor and blue-collar factory workers? Check. I've heard it said 1,000,000 times in 1,000,000 ways. Education is the key. Progressives have certainly invested a lot to ensure that they have a significant presence on our U.S. university campuses. U.S. post-secondary education costs have skyrocketed, easily eclipsing rates of inflation for decades, which recently is no small feat. Now, this has left the dream of a college education out of reach for many citizens. If we want more Americans to have a college education, the FAIRtax checks this box as well. The fair tax applies only to retail purchases, and college tuition is considered an investment, not a retail purchase. Therefore, the fair tax is not charged on college tuition. Furthermore, education will be paid for with pre-tax rather than post-tax dollars. In other words, you don't have to earn $140 to net the $100 you could spend on college. If you earn $140, you have $140 available to spend. Education costs will decrease by up to 40% based on estimates compiled. Check. The Democrats emphasize the importance of making home ownership more affordable and more available, as well as ensuring that our safety net programs are secure. The fair tax makes home ownership more affordable by creating a stronger economy, with studies showing that GDP, real wages, and purchasing power all increase with the fair tax. Check. Plus, nearly 90% of all U.S. home purchases are for previously owned homes. The fair tax applies only to new goods. Previously owned homes are not subject to the fair tax. Double check. Now, a key principle of the fair tax is that it's revenue neutral, bringing in the same amount that the Treasury currently collects with the income payroll tax system. Since the fair tax abolishes the regressive Social Security and Medicare payroll taxes, some have falsely claimed that the fair tax cripples or even eliminates these vital safety net programs. The exact opposite is true. The fair tax dramatically expands the tax base for these programs from just those who are working for a paycheck to everyone whose spending rises above the poverty level. Furthermore, the fair tax actually puts these programs on a much firmer financial footing, since taxing consumption is a much more stable and reliable way of raising revenue than taxing income. Check. Based on this simple analysis, it's baffling why Democrats are not coming out in droves to support the fair tax as a replacement for our outdated, regressive, and intrusive income payroll tax system. I remember driving with my dad when I was probably around 13 as he rolled through a red light while turning right. I, of course, called him on it, as teenagers love to do, noting what he had done was illegal. He smiled, and I'll never forget his response. "Do as I say, not as I do." Checkmate. In conclusion, Jade has clearly demonstrated that the fair tax is much more fair to the average American than the present income payroll tax system. Now, many of you have labored tirelessly for freedom from the federal income tax and the IRS. You deserve a great deal of credit for your efforts to educate the American people on the need to fund the American government in a way that's good for America and that returns freedom to the American people. It's imperative, though, that we don't replace the current income tax and the IRS with an alternative system that can still be manipulated by the ruling elite. We must let Congress and the President know that the best way to replace the income tax and the IRS is with the fair tax. Now, make no mistake about it. The fair tax is a grave threat to the ruling elites. It will strip them of their power and their ability to control us through the tax system. Their opposition to the fair tax will be fierce and unrelenting, and don't think for an instant they won't use half-truths, deception, and downright lies in their desperate attempt to hang on to their power. However, with the support of this president, we can finally eliminate the income tax and the IRS. Now, of course, the best course of action is not only to repeal the income tax and abolish the IRS, but to repeal the 16th Amendment as well, so that no future administration can ever shackle the American people with an income tax again. We must come together and ensure that real tax reform, the fair tax, is not subverted by the elites in D.C. This will take the diligent efforts from all of us. We need your financial assistance, and we need your grassroots assistance. Now, if you have contacts that will allow us to get more information about the fair tax to President Trump, please let us know. Also, please email us at info@fairtax.org, and we'll give you some options on how you can best help us. At a minimum, please call your congressional representative and ask if he or she supports the fair tax. If so, thank him or her for their support and suggest they become a co-sponsor of H.R. 25 if they're not one already. If not, ask why not. Now, if your representative claims to be unfamiliar with the fair tax, offer to have someone come to their office and explain it to them. The solution: pass the fair tax. Now, why would D.C. pass the fair tax and give up an almost unlimited source of donations? Well, they won't, at least not voluntarily. The only way they will is if the rest of us demand it. Isn't it time to end this ludicrous tax collection system in the IRS along with it? Help bring about real tax reform and stop future IRS abuses. By contributing or actually investing $10.40 a month, you help provide a financial base to Americans for fair taxation. Now, if you can make larger contributions/investments, these will be used not for salaries, as we're all volunteers, but for the needed updates to our economic studies, which will be vital for all future years. Please go to FAIRtax.org to invest in AFFT and help us pass the fair tax. It's an investment in your and your family's future.
This has been the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, President of Americans for Fair Taxation. Check back every week for news and information about the fair tax, and learn why the fair tax should replace our antiquated federal income tax system. If you'd like to receive a copy of the Chairman's Report in your inbox every week, sign up at FAIRtax.org.